morning, everyone. Whoa, can you hear me? Great. I'm Andrea Koppel with Mercy Corps, and I'm so glad to see there are no seats left in the room. I think that speaks very much to the importance of today's discussion with these young women. As we've seen in Egypt and Afghanistan, among other countries in transition, social change and a move, however halting, towards democracy doesn't necessarily mean that what we're seeing on the ground is automatically going to be greater opportunities for youth and for women. Over the course of the next hour, we're going to have the opportunity to hear from three young women from three different regions of the world: the Middle East, Latin America, and South Asia. I'm going to start off by asking a couple of questions to get things moving. We have microphones across the room, so I'm going to encourage you, as soon as I open things up, to please jump in with your questions. This is really an opportunity for you to speak to our panelists and for them to speak to you. Our hope is that we're going to be able to identify what is and what is not working right now in your countries. We in the development community and policymakers amongst us need to know how we can best support you. So we've already heard today from our keynote speaker, Lakshmi Puri. Allow me to introduce the other panelists. Immediately to Lakshmi's left is Basant Montasser. She's from Cairo, Egypt, and has been the Ashraq project manager for Save the Children in Egypt since 2009. She's a graduate of the American University in Cairo with a degree in journalism and mass communications. She has 7 years' experience in managing and implementing development and microfinance projects for international organizations such as the African Development Bank, IFAD, and the UNDP. To Basant's left is Rehana Kamal from Kabul, Afghanistan. Ms. Kamal works on advocacy and programs focusing on empowering young women like herself in Afghanistan. She's worked for several years as a grants coordinator with Creative Associates on the U.S. government-funded Ambassador's Small Grants Program. At present, she serves on the Program Advisory Board for establishing an economic center for women in Afghanistan, and recently met with President Hamid Karzai to discuss the need for reform to improve women's rights. And last but not least, we have Ana Dubon from El Salvador. Ms. Dubon has been involved with Plan International USA's work in El Salvador since 2004. She started as a participant in the Voices Project and now serves as an experienced consultant, training children in radio reporting and communications technology. But she has been engaged in community development programs since she was 13 years old. You'll notice there are two women sitting to Anna's left. There are translators, so please keep that in mind for your questions to Anna. She's going to have everything translated to her and then back out to the audience. So let me begin immediately to my left with Rehana. Rehana, how is being a young woman in Afghanistan on the front lines of that country different from being a man in Afghanistan or a young boy?
First, I would like to thank Ms. Lakshmi Puri for her nice speech on Women's on Global, and then I would like to thank Interactions Organizing Committee for inviting me and for giving me this honorable opportunity to be part of this conference. And special thanks to Creative Associates for sponsoring me for this conference. It's not easy for a woman from Afghanistan to come to the United States, to the other corner of the world. But they made it possible for me to come to the United States. Women, in these days, women after Taliban left in Afghanistan, and international community came to Afghanistan, women's situation is improving day by day. It improved, but still there are so many other challenges existing. The challenge they faced from the first day up to now, they're still existing, and they are increasing in so many other ways. The first challenge women are facing in Afghanistan is poverty. They suffer a lot with poverty, with security, and with lack of education. We have limited schools for girls, and the quality of education for girls, and especially for female teachers, is not in a good shape. In villages, if you go, I asked a mother in a village, why you don't let your daughter to go for school? She told me, I don't feel secure to let my daughter and go and sit under a tree and get education. So it's both. We don't have schools, and we don't have families are facing from poverty. And in the southern and the southeastern parts of Afghanistan that are mostly affected by Taliban from 10 years, and they are still in those dark days living there. A child was asked that he was asked about school, and he was asked about a book. He got afraid, and he was asked, why are you afraid of a book in school? It's the way from the first day when Taliban were there. It's in his mind, and how it's injected in his mind that school is not a good place, and book is not a good thing to hold. This is how the situation of education is in Afghanistan. And the key to all these poverties and violence against women is education. So we need to educate our women, and especially our youth, children. The other problem is women's political participation and women's political change. I'm sure you have heard about our Islamic scholars' declaration a month or 2 months ago. It was declared and also backed by our President Hamid Karzai. They put few statements on, especially on women. Women is not allowed to travel alone. Women cannot go and sit in a classroom with a man, and she's not allowed to stand in a local place or in an academic area with a man. And a man is primary, and a woman is secondary. And a man has the right to beat his wife or his daughter or his sister. And it was backed by our president. So this is the biggest challenge and the biggest fear nowadays Afghan women face. And they are afraid. And they know that this is something Taliban demanded, and through Islamic scholars, they declared and backed by our President Karzai. When international community came to Afghanistan, our president used women's rights to raise funds, to bring money into country. Now, when it's again in his benefit to negotiate with Taliban, he is again using women's rights by violating their rights. And we have a good number of women in parliament, but the problem is they are not given authority to decide to go for something. I can give you one example. As Ms. Puri also said about women's political participation, and it's a resolution of UN Security Council. The resolution is called 1325, and women can participate in political issues especially conflict resolution process. And as most of you know, we have an upcoming summit in Chicago. It's calling all donor countries to come together and talk about Afghanistan's future, especially peace resolution. But our government denied women to go for and participate in this summit. So this is another challenge. Women, we have women in parliament, and we have women ministers. We have women in the decision-making level, but they are denied to go and participate in these process. But still, I'm happy for seeing some civil service societies in Afghanistan and activist individuals working for bringing peace, political change, and especially for gender equality in Afghanistan. When this declaration came up to the media, all these activist organizations and individuals went out to the streets and they started protesting, and they said, who the Taliban are, why we have to listen to them. We need to empower our women. We need to bring economic development to the country. So we need women's participation in all aspects of this country. So I'm happy for that. And when I came to the States before starting this conference, I met a group of women and young women and men here who are studying and working in the States, but they are originally from Afghanistan. And they were working on policy level for Afghanistan to advocate for women and to bring changes in the policies. And they were working on writing a paper to present it to the summit in Chicago. So I'm really happy and optimistic to the future of Afghanistan for seeing these professional youngs working for their future.
Rayhana, thank you so much. I'm going to turn to Basant and give you an opportunity to share with the audience. It's been a little over a year since Hosni Mubarak was overthrown. We've seen Egypt haltingly moving towards stumbling, your words, towards democracy. What is the situation on the front lines of Egypt from your perspective for youth and for girls and women?
Well, first of all, thank you Interaction, and thank you Save the Children for having me, and thank you all for your time to come and listen to us. So on a macro level, I think many reports come to say that Egypt is going a transition, a demographic transition, so like 62% of young people are youth between the age of 10 to 29. So out of 80 million, we have 62% who are between the age of 10 and 29. This reflects on a lot of things. You know, there's a lot of capacities, there's a lot of energy with the youth, and a lot of untapped resources that needs to be engaged and challenged, and building on the capacities of these youth. And I think that since the revolution, if we come and say the slogan of the revolution was bread, freedom, social justice, and human dignity. And in my personal opinion, I don't see any of this a year after. I mean, if we come to talk on the political level, even though we've seen women come out and females going to the voting boxes and, giving out their voice to whoever candidate they see, this wasn't reflected in the number of women in parliament, for example. So we have I think less than 2% are in the parliament, about 8 women out of 518 members. And I think 1 or 2 of them could be actually appointed. Also in writing our constitution. Women represent 40% of the population, of the Egyptian population, and we only get 6 women out of 100. I feel there is a lot of injustice still in women's and young women political voice and representation in lawmaking bodies in Egypt. Also on the young females, they face a lot of gender problems. We come to see a lot of, like, a recent report said it's 91% facing FGM. And this is, a lot of people might not expect this number to be in Egypt, but it is. We have 50% of adolescent girls who are illiterate in Upper Egypt. Actually, 40% of the population is illiterate, and you wouldn't expect these numbers in this century. It's so unfair. So despite the progress and all the investments made, there's a lot of space, and there's a long way to go.
Anna. It's been 20 years since the Civil War ended in El Salvador, but we know, as you're our closest neighbor here in North America, that the prevalence of crime, of youth gangs, is getting greater and greater. What is the situation for young women and youth in general in El Salvador from your perspective?
Hoy más que nunca quisiera hablar inglés.
Today more than ever, I wish I spoke English.
Primeramente quiero agradecer a Plan Internacional, que es la institución por la que estoy aquí. Para mí, estar acá es como ganarse la lotería para una mujer de El Salvador que quiere estar hablando acá.
First of all, I really want to thank Plan International, which is the group that's responsible for bringing me here. And I feel like I just won the lottery to be a woman from El Salvador and to be able to be here with you.
Mi corazón está latiendo muy fuerte.
My heart's beating really fast.
Con la pregunta, antes de todo, para poner un poco relacionar mi respuesta con la pregunta de ella, quiero decir un poco cómo ha sido mi vida en la infancia y tal vez puede contestar un poco la pregunta que ella ha hecho.
Before answering the question directly, perhaps I can say a little bit about my life, my childhood, and then that will inform the answer to the question that you just asked.
Mi familia somos 5 y tengo una mamá, 3 hermanos más, y yo soy la única niña de la casa de los hermanos, y cada uno tenemos un papá diferente porque en Chalatenango, en El Salvador, es normal que los padres no respondan por sus hijos, y bueno.
I come from a family of 4 children, and we live with my mother. Each one of us has a different father. In El Salvador, unfortunately, we have a situation where fathers don't always take responsibility for their children. This is a very common situation.
En mi casa, yo viví toda mi infancia hasta mis 14 años con mis 3 hermanos. Eso fue muy difícil, es una de las etapas más difíciles de mi vida, porque vivir con 3 hombres, mi mamá tiene una herencia bastante machista. Eso fue uno de mis problemas más grandes, porque me impidió muchísimo, me cerró muchísimas oportunidades, pero sobre todo me impidió crecer como mujer dentro de mi infancia.
So the first 14, 15 years of my life were pretty difficult. They were hard years of my life. I grew up with 3 brothers and a mother who was also very steeped in this macho culture of our country. So not only were many opportunities closed off for me as a girl, I also felt like my own just personal growth and development was being blocked.
Mi familia, mis abuelos, mi mamá, debido al conflicto armado, ellos generaron o fortalecieron aún más su machismo, como se cerraron a querer pensar que una niña dentro de un hogar podría ser más que una niña o podría ir más allá de donde estaba en su casa. Y eso hacía en gran medida, en mi hogar, afectó muchísimo, porque era como la niña invisible, la que no estaba, o sí estaba, pero era como si mi familia hubiese contratado a alguien para que atendiera al resto de la familia.
So in my family, with my grandmother and my mother, and in the situation of the war, or the period after the war in El Salvador, there was still a great deal of machismo. They didn't really want a girl to be involved in a lot of different things. I felt like an invisible girl, or if I was visible at all, it was because I was there to wait on the other people in the home.
Con eso no quiero decir que mi familia es mala, no, para nada. Lo que quiero decir es de que es una herencia del machismo en El Salvador, es como dijéramos como la principal causa de discriminación hacia la mujer, tanto niña, mujer adolescente, joven adulta, incluso de la tercera edad. Y lo que quiero decir es que si mi familia me cerró muchas de eso, porque hace poco comprendí eso, si mi familia me cerró muchas oportunidades por el entorno machista en el que yo viví, es porque también ellos heredaron de su familia esta situación.
So I'm not trying to say my family was bad, not at all. They just inherited this machista culture, and I think it's the biggest cause of discrimination against women at all ages, from your childhood up through your youth. Even when you're an older woman, you can be discriminated against because of this machismo. And I just realized that the reason that, I just realized this recently, that the reason that my family acted this way was that they had also grown up that way themselves. They had also inherited this machismo.
Entonces, yo pregunto, ahora imagínense ustedes, si todas las zonas rurales del país, porque yo soy de una zona rural, si todas las zonas rurales del país, todas las familias tienen una herencia como esta, entonces, ¿cómo estamos en El Salvador? Una pregunta.
So I asked myself, and you know, I'm from a rural area, and if all of the families in the rural areas of my countries came up with this kind of a legacy, this kind of inheritance of machismo, how are we doing as a country?
Y lo digo porque la mujer en El Salvador no ha tenido como mayor avance psicológico. La mujer adulta, la que ha heredado de nuestros abuelos eso, no ha tenido la oportunidad o un avance, un desarrollo donde pueda visualizar a la mujer como su compañera. Mi madre fue un trabajo muy difícil tratar de decirle a mi mamá, soy mujer, yo tengo sueños, yo quiero ser periodista profesional, yo quiero muchas cosas. Para mí fue uno de los trabajos más grandes, pero fue más grande yo no porque tuve que convencer a otras mujeres que lucharan conmigo, yo tuve que luchar con una mujer en mi familia.
So in El Salvador, adult women are still struggling with all of this, and so I was in a situation where I had to really convince my mother that I could do things, that I wanted to get beyond what was seen for me as my destiny. I wanted to be a professional journalist, and it was hard because I wasn't having a woman as my ally. I had to struggle against a woman to be able to move forward.
Y Andrea, mi mamá y todas las mujeres de mi familia, mayores que mí, ellas fueron cocineras, lavarropa. Durante el conflicto armado, ellas fueron de todo, menos mujeres que pudieran proponer, que pudieran opinar, que pudieran hacer muchas cosas. Entonces mi mamá trató de hacer lo mismo conmigo, yo puedo hacer cualquier cosa, pero no puedes participar, no puedes opinar. Entonces, de cierta manera, esa herencia machista o esa participación durante el conflicto armado provocó un efecto negativo en las nuevas generaciones de las cuales yo estoy en este momento.
So Andrea, when my mother was involved, was in El Salvador, obviously during the war, in our part of the country, the war was going on, and her participation was to cook and to wash clothes. And her participation was not, nor were any other women really involved in giving their opinions and making proposals. They were supposed to cook and wash clothes for those who were involved in the armed conflict. So what they tried to do is reproduce that with the next generations, and that's having very negative effects.
Perdón que hable demasiado de mi vida, pero yo represento la vida de la mayoría de los jóvenes, pero sobre todo de las mujeres jóvenes en El Salvador, de las zonas rurales. Y aunque ustedes no lo crean, es así, es la situación de la mayoría, y porque la mayoría, todos los salvadoreños vivieron el conflicto armado, entonces todos tenemos que tener un poquito de esa herencia.
So I'm sorry I'm talking so much about my own life, but I really do feel like my life represents what's happening in our country to so many young women, especially in rural areas. I think it really represents the majority experience.
Ahora, pasándome un poco de nivel, yo desde mis 13 años, sí, desde mis 13 años participo en medios de comunicación. Empecé jugando en un programa infantil, pero ese juego me dio la oportunidad de trabajar en una radio y a través de esa radio yo pude darle la oportunidad a muchas mujeres en El Salvador para que también opinaran, se expresaran, pero sobre todo también para que estas mujeres tuvieran la oportunidad que muchas niñas de mi edad no tuvimos en ese momento, y sobre todo la radio me dio la oportunidad de crecer como mujer y de creer en mí misma, porque yo no creía en mí misma, pero creí en mí y ahora estoy en los Estados Unidos, aquí frente a ustedes, y eso significa, y puede ser que mañana esté en no sé dónde, en Europa, en Canadá, no sé, pero estoy feliz, y desde trabajar desde mi comunidad en Guarjila, que es muy lejos, estoy aquí. Y para mí es un ejemplo del desarrollo de una mujer.
So when I was 13 years old, I started to work with the communications media. There was a radio project, and it was sort of like a game to me. But this game turned into a real experience where I was working in the radio, I was doing interviews, and I was helping other women, other Salvadoran girls and women to express themselves on the radio. They were able to express their own opinions, and it was something that we hadn't had before. And this project, more than anything, taught me it helped me grow as a woman. It helped me believe in myself, because I hadn't believed in myself before. And here I am in the United States with you. Who knows where I'll be tomorrow? Maybe I'll be in Europe, or I'll be in Canada. But it was an important experience for me.
Y para finalizar, solo quiero decir, en El Salvador somos el 53% de las mujeres. Y habemos tantas mujeres, y quizás estamos trabajando en el gobierno, en los diferentes órganos, pero de nada sirve que la mujer esté ahí si no se le da la oportunidad de participar. Espero algún día formar parte o crear un espacio de participación de la mujer donde no solo esté como un modelo sexual o como un modelo, porque es bonito, lo voy a tener aquí. No, quisiera ser parte de crear un proceso de participación donde la mujer participe.
So to end, I just want to say that women make up 53% of my country, and we do have some representation in the different branches of government, but that will be for naught if we don't have real participation in those government spaces. And in my future, I'd like to be able to see those spaces created. I'd like to be part of having women being seen for something beyond our sexual identity, beyond how beautiful we are. I would really like to be part of creating that space for women and girls.
Thank you.
I'm going to open things up to your questions in just one moment, but before I do, I have to turn to Lakshmi and ask you, as you listen to these three young women, we obviously see tremendous hope in the fact that they're here today, that they're fighting for rights for women and youth in their countries, but clearly there's a long way to go. I can tell you just coincidentally, I just got off a plane last night from Kenya. And I was visiting what is the largest USAID-funded youth program in the world. Mercy Corps is implementing Yes Youth Can over the next 3 years. And I can say that we know here the Obama administration gets it. They have put in place both a youth policy as well as a gender policy with the National Action Plan for Women and USAID's new gender policy. They're requiring, in the case of Yes Youth Can, that 40% of those who are being included in the program are young women. But how do we ensure, no matter who is elected at the end of this year here in the United States, that these gains are consolidated and we don't find ourselves slipping back? We clearly still have a long way to go.
Well, I think you've asked me two questions, if I may put it that way. One is, of course, how much hope, how much despair? No, we don't despair. We have great hope because of what you have said. because of what these young ladies represent, the will to move ahead and to find their own agency, and as I said earlier on, subjecthood, and not be caught in the victimhood trap, because that's what women, as we heard from their different spaces, that's what they have been trapped into in the past, but now there is an attempt to break out, and we, you just mentioned the US government, and there are governments around the world, and the international development community must not and will not allow this hope and this optimism to be belied. And we will definitely, UN Women will mobilize all of you, work with all of you, to also ensure that international norms and standards that continue to get refreshed, that they continue to get strengthened in support of advancing women's rights, but also holding governments accountable, to their commitments to those norms and standards.
Okay, questions? Just raise your hand and somebody will bring a microphone. How about this woman right here, the second table from the back? And if you could just state your name, who you're with, and if you want to address the question to someone in particular. Thank you.
Good morning. Pat Morris with Creative Associates International. Thank you also very much, the three of you, for your comments. I think we're all very proud and inspired by you, and we think the future might be very safe with young women like yourselves. In the 25 years or so that I've been doing gender work, I think one of the things that we've realized is that it is as important as it is to promote women's advancement, it's also important to work with men to promote gender equality. And I'd be really interested in hearing a little bit from the three of you on what your experience has been in terms of your work, in terms of what you've noticed in Egypt and Afghanistan and El Salvador, in terms of young men and the kind of support or coalitions that young men and young women have been able to come together on in promoting gender equality and women's rights. What are some of the successes and maybe what are some of the difficulties in doing that? Thank you very much.
Thank you. How about if we begin with Vasant?
Okay, I manage a project that works with out-of-school rural adolescent girls, and we provide literacy classes and life skills, sports, and some economic strengthening to mothers. And from my experience, I totally agree with you. We cannot separate women and girls from empowerment from those without the support of men and boys and male community members. We work closely with community members on the local level. So before coming in and introducing the program, we sit with community members, both men and women. We try to create a supporting environment for these girls and women to come and participate with us in our projects. And I feel that once you've gained this community support, if a man is a supporter, he'll go beyond. So I had an example of a youth manager who's donated a part of his land to open early childhood development classes and has extended the building to have more classes for girls to come and learn and play. So these youth centers are made as a safe space for girls. Usually it's looked at as a safe, like a place for boys to come in and play only. So now it's a place to accommodate both, and it's not just an entertainment center. It's a learning center. It's more than. I've done a research most recently where we're kind of developing a curriculum that works with boys and girls, and we went and heard the voices of these children, and we realized that there is a communication problem, and there is no emotional bonds between families and family members, and this creates the gap and makes it even grow bigger. So sometimes I don't know if Professor Andrews is here, but I totally agree with him. Some data is not quantifiable. You know, how can you quantify emotions? And so sorry for the USAID fellows. Some data is not quantifiable, and sometimes you just have to come and see the field. You know, come and visit, and you'll see, you know, at the starting phase of the project, what girls are like and what the participants are like, and come and see the end impact, and, you know, do your report. So I'm sorry if I'm too blunt about that, but this is my own personal opinion of it. Thank you.
Rehana.
One thing I have experienced myself and witnessed for men in Afghanistan, they so much believe in their cultural and religious values they have, and it's very difficult for them to let international community to bring the changes. Especially the word gender is something really negative for them. And although the meaning is the same, just giving equal rights to women, but as this gender name comes from West, so they believe it's something, it's taking our religious and cultural values from us. For this reason, instead of bringing the new policies in Afghanistan, it's better to work with the existing system to improve the existing system, to give these men the feeling that you will have your values, but let your women to get education. And once their women get education, the doors for all other opportunities will be open. I can give you one example. This year, I was selected to give a speech in my office on Women's Day. I gave this speech, and I never mentioned the name gender, but I covered all those issues under gender, and having the cultural and religious values, and all those women were clapping and they were coming to me. Although I'm studying at the American University and working with Americans, but they were telling me that we want our women to be like you. It's because I cared for their cultural and religious values. So that's what I experienced, to let the existing system to improve instead of bringing new policies or the other countries' systems.
Can you give us an example of what you said? How you touched on gender without using that
Yes,
that word?
In our history, we have some good examples of women who went and stood with our men shoulder by shoulder, and they fought, especially during the times of Soviet Union in Afghanistan, and they were working with men to get the liberty in Afghanistan. And I give them examples of the wives of our Prophet Muhammad. They were going for trade, they were going for women's rights. So these examples made them, and I have read some verses from our Quran that talks about equal rights for men and women, economic development, for education, in all sectors. So these things, for having cultural values and religious values, it made them to feel like, yes, having these values, we can still let our women to go for education.
Thank you. Ana.
A diferencia de mi compañera, ¿cuál es el nombre de Cash? Maisa. A diferencia de lo que ella dijo con respecto a la educación, en El Salvador hay acceso a la educación, hay acceso a la escuela ahora, la educación mayormente gratuita, pero en El Salvador la educación no está en ningún momento, en ningún espacio, hay enfoque de derecho. Entonces los niños y las niñas, imagínense, están estudiando, pero no se les va metiendo en su cabeza que los niños y las niñas somos iguales.
First of all, I wanted to say that unlike the situation that Basant described, we do have a fair amount of access to education in schools in El Salvador, and the education is pretty much free. But the education in El Salvador does not have a rights focus. And so girls and boys grow up, they go to school, but they never learn at any moment that girls and boys have the same rights, that we're the same.
Y entonces, dada esa situación en que en los centros escolares no hay educación con enfoque de derecho, Plan, que es la institución que yo represento ahora, uno de sus objetivos es trabajar precisamente con la niñez en materia de enfoque y derecho, que la niñez se empodere de sus derechos. Y la niñez en El Salvador, si estamos hablando de que el 53% de la población es mujer, de ese 53%, el 60% es menor de 30 años y el 44% es menor de 16 años. Entonces son niñas. Eso significa que si una niña está empoderada de sus derechos, puede fortalecer sus capacidades para poder desarrollarse en su futuro.
So the schools don't have this rights focus, and so one of the things that Plan International has done in my community is really to work with children on this program about rights. And we're learning about our rights now, and this is very important because, as I said, 53% of our country is women, but 60% of women are under 30 years of age, and 44% of women are under 16 years of age. So it's a young country, and if girls learn about our rights, that's a big thing.
Y esa participación de la niñez, ese empoderamiento sería natural de ellos, es como ellos quieren luchar por lo que ellos quieren. Ahora, nosotros estamos en un problema a nuestra edad, yo no estoy muy vieja, pero a mi edad, otras personas tenemos que luchar con las mismas mujeres para que ellas se unan a la lucha. Pero si las niñas a esa edad están empoderadas, entonces la lucha va avanzando. Subimos de categoría y creo que eso puede ser más fácil en otro siglo o algo por el estilo.
So I think if children are empowered from a young age, we'll have a great deal of progress. We have a problem now. I'm not very old, but I have to fight to get women to join us in this struggle. And I think if you have a whole generation of girls coming up that know their rights, the fight will be less difficult.
Y estoy de acuerdo con lo que dijeron por ahí, no sé quién. No tratamos de decir, de quitarles los derechos a los hombres, en ningún momento. Tampoco quizás no es nuestra amenaza, no son nuestros enemigos, pero sí queremos que quede bien claro, que se visualice que los dos somos seres humanos, ¿sí? Y que las diferencias podrán ser físicas, pero si somos de un mismo país, si somos de un mismo estado, por lo consiguiente tenemos los mismos derechos, los mismos deberes, y es esa nuestra lucha. Esa es la lucha de las mujeres mayores, de las menores, de las niñas, de lo que sea, pero queremos decir, las mujeres no pretendemos ser más que los hombres, solo queremos que nos coloquen en el mismo nivel.
So it's really important to emphasize, as my friend here said too, that we're not trying to take rights away from men. Men are not our enemies. We just want them to visualize us in a different way, to really see us as equal human beings, that the only difference between us is a physical difference, that we live in the same country and therefore we have the same rights and the duties of all citizens in the country. So that's our struggle. But we do not see ourselves as greater than men, nor do we see men as our enemies.
Lakshmi, I have to ask you, as I'm listening to these young women, and it hasn't been that long in our own country that women have had rights to vote and employment and all of the other, but how much of the use of the cultural norms is an excuse by the men who are in power in these countries to keep the status quo?
Absolutely. The issue of cultural relativism, the issue of cultural sovereignty is invoked all the time by not only men, but established systems, faith-based groups, to assert that women have a separate place and men have a separate place. And it's not an issue of inequality, it is just an issue of where each should be in terms of their role play in society, in politics, and in the economy. So we have, that is really gender stereotyping. That is at the root of all these issues of how, I think we've heard very eloquently and from proximate experience, how these young women face the gender stereotype related challenges that arise from cultural, religious norms, and also that give rise to a number of harmful traditional practices like the FGM issue that was mentioned, or even considering violence, domestic violence included, as sanctioned. So these are really fundamental issues that need to be fought. And I agree that without the partnership and invoking of participation of men in this campaign to end gender stereotypes, and campaign against these kind of harmful practices, and the invocation of also tradition and culture, we need to partner with men and boys. And so, for example, UN Women is working from the ground up in our programs to educate and involve men and boys, and even in our global advocacy platforms. For example, we have Unite to End Violence Against Women campaign. And we have the Secretary General of the UN, who is a man, leads it, and he has set up a Men Leaders campaign, where he is involved influential men leaders from all over the world. And we are using platforms like the World Association of Girl Guides and Scouts. We have used also the Boy Scout side of it. And then we are also using FIFA and other games which are supposed to be very masculine kind of, you mentioned sports. That is another area where we can use men to really advocate for change. So all of this is really about changing the perception of masculinity in itself, and machismo, as was being mentioned, and to say that gender equality and is not only, and ending gender stereotype is not about taking away the rights of one and giving it to other, but it is about more meaningful and fulfilling relationships between men and women and boys and girls.
Good. Okay, next, the woman right there, sort of on the side of the room.
Good morning. Thank you so much for this amazing panel. Great kickstart to the day. My name is Suzanne Ehlers, and I'm with PAI, a group here in Washington, D.C., and we work on the issues of sexual and reproductive health and rights, so that's where my question comes from. Last week, there was a meeting at the United Nations, and the theme of the meeting, in a timely manner, was adolescence and youth. And I found that delegates had the toughest time thinking about adolescence and youth in situations related to sexual and reproductive health that were distant from what they wished were the case for young women and men around the world. The fact that unmarried men and women are having sex, the fact that unmarried men and women and young men and women need protections. And so I guess I'm wondering, from an advocacy perspective, either work that you've seen or work that you're doing that helps bridge the gap between the reality that women and men are living in countries and what policymakers and delegates would like to think is the case for young men and women, and be able to put into place protections that are needed so that all of the possibilities and opportunity that each of you represent are actually able to be manifest. Thank you.
Is there one of you in particular who feels that this question is something you would like to speak to? Yes, Vasant?
First of all, through our project, we do a little bit of teachings for the girls on sexual and reproductive health, especially in relation to FGM. But when it comes to these sensitive topics, I think we need to revise the way we bring it forward to communities and local communities that have strong and deep-rooted beliefs of certain harmful practices, which they don't consider as harmful. You know, they think it's a protection for the girl. And some of it is ignorance. You know, just it's like a celebration in the community that the girl has grown older, and you know she's become marriage appropriate,
Manageable age.
yes, manageable. You know, she's reached the age of marriage. So I think that we have to revise the way we bring forward sensitive topics to communities. Also, I think on a political level, I've heard on 2 occasions 2 women members of parliament speaking of FGM, for example, as not being a priority. And I think this woman forgot that, you know, the revolution called for human dignity, and FGM is obviously not human dignity for adolescent girls or young women. So I think there are topics that are very sensitive, and we need to revise the way we bring them forward to communities.
How about if we go for another couple of questions from the audience before, right in the middle?
Thank you very much. I have a sore throat. So my name is Kamini Paul. I work for the agency coordinating body for Afghan relief based in Kabul. And my question is more in relation to the support from the international community for the panelists, but maybe more specifically for Rihanna. We're seeing with the budgetary constraints that will happen over the next year or so, particularly with financial perspectives which are annually, set, we're seeing that a lot of the support to women's programs are either cross-cutting as of now, but are currently being diverted, or programs and projects are being cut. And I want to ask the panelists whether they're seeing this trend in their respective countries. Sorry. The other thing is we've seen some successes in Afghanistan. We had an established Ministry of Women's Affairs, but we know that it hasn't been as effective as it should have been, and I wanted to know what your thoughts on that was. You know, is it political? Is it cultural? Why hasn't MOA been able to be more effective in ensuring compliance with 1325 and AWA? And also, we have a lot of movement at the Kabul level, but very little voices from the provincial level being heard in Kabul. So how can we try and ensure that the rural voices are heard? Because at the moment, a lot of advocacy is done at the Kabul level. So it's 2 points, rather than lip service from the international community, I mean, is there going to be funding commitment and political commitment to support women's rights programs per se? And how can we ensure that will happen in the next funding cycles?
Yeah, I think, frankly, Rihanna, you can probably be better placed to address the role of the Ministry of Women's Affairs and the lack of this knowledge and action reaching the provincial and local level. If you could just take a few minutes to answer that so we can get one more question in before the end. Thank you.
One problem to this issue is the quality. We don't have a good quality of people to work for women's issue at this level. We have good institutes now training people, especially in leadership roles in Afghanistan. We are in the process of increasing the quality of people The other problem is with the government. They still believe it's whether government or at the village level. They still believe man is the person who can do anything on decision-making level. So they most of the times they don't give enough place for women to go for a decision-making process. As I give the example of resolution of 1325, it exists. We are the members, but our government, our foreign ministry, men, and our president, they do not allow women to be part of this resolution process. This is the other problem. So we are struggling. We have some groups, women advisory groups. They are visiting president, and I was part of one of the meetings. I went and talked to the president on women's issues, on village level, on women's commissions level, and ministries. We fought for one of our ministers, and she got the position. We now have 2 ministers in our cabinet. So it's changing. It's not in a good shape, but it's changing day by day.
Okay, we have time for one more question, right in the back. It's going to have to be a quick one because they really want to stop in 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Laura Henderson from the World Wildlife Fund, and I wanted to thank you for all your very inspirational work that all of you are doing, and ask what sorts of programs, from your perspective, are most useful for US-based NGOs to invest in and to design? Is it training programs for youth and women's rights? Is it advocacy training programs? Is it training on social media, how to launch campaigns? I would just love to hear your ideas on where our investments and program designs would be best spent. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. Anna, why don't we start with you just very quickly. If you could just in 1 minute or so give us your answer, and we'll work our way down the line.
Sí. Antes quiero comentarles que en la mayoría, en muchos países, por lo menos algunos que he visitado, es paradójico que en El Salvador a veces la gente, las mujeres internacionales estén a veces más interesadas en sobresalir o que la mujer se empodere que las mismas mujeres de su país. Entonces, esa ayuda internacional psicológica o ese apoyo que se tiene de otras naciones fortalece aún más a la mujer de un país para poder, como decirlo, para que ésta sienta más ánimos de poder luchar por algo.
I think what I can say is that in many of the countries of the world that I've visited, El Salvador is one where there's been a lot of international assistance, a lot of women's issues have come in through international groups, and it's been very important for us because sometimes the international groups are more focused on women's empowerment than we are ourselves. So I would say that any kind of international assistance that can come in to help us look at these issues, the psychological support that comes with that is tremendous.
Las 3 mujeres que estamos aquí podemos tener muchas ganas que la mujer se desarrolle, que la mujer crezca, que participe. Pero en muchas de nuestras naciones, también en nuestros países, los recursos económicos también son una de las dificultades más grandes para poder llegar al presidente, llegar al Estado, los órganos legislativos. Y creo que esa es nuestra mayor dificultad porque en El Salvador hay muchas ganas de crecer, pero las dificultades económicas son uno de los principales problemas que hay.
And the 3 of us here may have many, many desires for lots of things to change in our country for women, but the lack of economic resources, I'm sure, is an issue in all of our countries. And so it's not enough just to have the desire to grow. We need to be able to have economic resources so that we can actually move slowly into the Congress, the presidential level, et cetera.
Yes. Rehana, do you want to address what kind of programs would be most useful in Afghanistan?
I'm belonging to the eastern part of Afghanistan, and in my province we have a population of around 400,000 people, and we have about 2 high schools and 5 primary schools. So apart from having leadership and vocational trainings for women, we are in a great need of schools, number of schools and the quality and the quantity, both for schools for girls. And apart from schools, we have so much money in Afghanistan, as it's discussed yesterday. We went more than its limits. We have so much money, but the problem is we don't have we don't have accountability, and there is no transparency in Afghanistan. Everyone believes this is international aid and we have to put it in our pockets, and no one looks after that money, and no one helps the government and individual civil service societies to ask them where this money goes, and they just keep it in their pockets.
Thank you. Basant, 1 minute, please.
I think that in general, maybe youth, girls, and women programs are most in need in Egypt, with maybe a right-based approach. Advocacy is very important, and I think that capacity building of youth and young local leaders, maybe even religious leaders, is very important as well.
Lakshmi, a final thought.
Yes, I think I would like to respond to this point about what can US-based NGOs do best and where their intervention would be most effective. First of all, please advocacy in the US itself, so that government, the Congress is fully mobilized in support of gender equality and women's empowerment related policies globally, to support them globally, ending the underinvestment also in that area, including in UN Women, because really we had high expectations from government of United States to support UN Women, because we were created to end underinvestment in gender equality. So advocacy on that. And on the ground, and in particular in countries in transition, in countries in post-conflict, use the United Nations to really do the advocacy and also do the intervention, because these are sensitive territories, and you need a kind of honest broker in terms of the United Nations to do that interlocution and do that intervention and support women's movements. I think capacity building of women's movements, that and bringing out their voice, articulation of their demands, and then bringing out their agency. That is the biggest thing that the US NGOs can do.
Lakshmi Puri, thank you so much. Please join me in thanking all of these remarkable young women and our two translators.